Welcome to Detroit Auto Accident Law with Ravid and Associates.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Detroit Auto Accident Law with the trial lawyers of Ravid and Associates. Ravid and Associates is a Michigan-based personal injury firm that's fought for more than 10,000 accident victims statewide. Today's guest is Kristian Kajdic, an associate attorney at Ravid and Associates, who focuses on civil litigation, no-fault, and auto negligence cases. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today, Kristian and I are talking about how insurance companies undervalue serious injury claims and how that can affect your case. Hi, Kristian. Good to see you.
Hey, Sean. Thank you for having me today.
You bet. So let's just get into it. Like, why, in your experience, do insurance companies often place much lower value on an injury claim than, say, a person bringing the claim expects?
Sean, I think at the end of the day, any insurance company is a for-profit corporation. So the end goal is, keep the costs as low, retain the revenue as high as possible, and then you have the best profits, which is either for the shareholders or just individuals in the company there. The issue with that is obviously they don't take into account, the actual individual and there's certain situation that they're in after they're involved, whether it's an auto accident or slip and fall or trip and fall. And at the end of the day, that obviously causes a lot of problems and undervalues cases that the insurance companies end up offering to injured people.
Yeah, I hear you. In your experience, what are some of the most common ways insurance companies do try to reduce the amount they ultimately pay on a claim?
There's a few factors. Most of them I see consistently is that they dispute causation. They dispute the necessity of the treatment of an individual. They highlight obviously pre-existing conditions an individual may have. They delay payments to try pressuring settlements, early settlements on cases. And usually using social media or some previous statements that an individual has made to try to, as much as they can, poke holes in a person's claim in order to obviously, pay less than they want to pay for a claim.
Okay. And let's talk about the way someone maybe handles medical treatment after their crash. How can that end up affecting how the insurance company evaluates the claim?
Some of the common ones I always see is gaps in treatment, delay in getting treatment, and then obviously doing follow-ups from recommendations of other doctors, such as if your primary care doctor or your pain doctor says, you should get an MRI or you should get a physical therapy, and you don't do that, it kind of, creates this thing for the insurance company in their minds is the injury as bad as this individual is claiming? And at the end of the day, right after an accident occurs, sometimes people are still in shock from
Yep.
two cars colliding each other, and they may not feel any pain until the next day or even 2 or 3 days later. But I think the important part is just to seek the treatment and not always have that mindset that I'm going to get better in 2 weeks or, I'm going to get better in 3 weeks. And then there's that gap of treatment from the day of the collision to the first treatment. And that, again, like I said, creates this perspective in the insurance eyes that the injuries are not as bad as you claim that they are.
Yeah. Oh, that's they can create that narrative based on that supposed evidence. I'm wondering, um, what about you mentioned this earlier, Kristian, pre-existing injuries? How do insurance companies kind of use pre-existing injuries or medical history when they're evaluating a serious injury claim? Because I'm guessing, there's plenty of people that had a bad back before the accident, or you had something that got worse. Like, how does that get handled?
Sure, Sean. That's a great example. Obviously, everybody gets back pains at some point in their life.
Yeah.
Whether you're 20s or even 30s or going up 40s, 50s. Obviously, people have back pain, and assuming you get in a motor vehicle accident or collision, and you claim back pain. Obviously, one of the tactics that they're going to try seeing is, has this individual ever claimed back pain? Before this auto accident. And it could
Right.
be a claim of back pain that's even 5 years or more over, but they'll point to that record and they'll say, look at that back pain that you claimed, 5 years ago or X amount of years ago, or even, a year ago. But at the end of the day in Michigan, the case law says, and the law says you find individuals as they are. So if I have a client who's, let's say, 50s or 60s, and obviously they have, some back pain or had back pain or, before, as long as I'm able to show that the back pain has gotten worse because of this collision, that's all I have to show. So whether they have the pre-existing problems or not is just a small factor, but obviously it's an argument that the insurance companies will always make on our injured individuals.
Yeah. I take that as not to be discouraged, right? Like if you got an old football injury, you got an old football injury. But in Michigan, it doesn't matter if it's major limb force or whatever it is. That's what matters. So, um, what about, I know that insurance adjusters are out there doing their job. And I'm wondering how early communication with an insurance adjuster could affect the direction of a claim, maybe later on. Because I'm thinking, I hear about insurance adjusters being like, they're on the phone with you ASAP, which seems like good service. So that seems like good service.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Sean, it might be good service, but there's also always underlining, reason for that service provided. And I'll give you an example. And I have yet to find an insurance company that, you don't get the initial statement that says, hi, I'm, whoever, I work for this insurance company, and you are on a recorded line. And that's the first thing. And the reason for that is they want to catch you early on, catch saying whatever you say. And that way, in case the case gets very serious or heavy into litigation, they're going to use those recorded statements from the beginning or the first time you spoke to adjuster, a day or two after the collision, and they'll use those statements against you. So one quick example here, Sean, is let's say a day or two after the auto accident, the adjuster calls you and you say, hey, I'm dealing with some back and neck pain, but you never mention any right shoulder pain or, left shoulder pain. And then later on, obviously, you have a torn rotator cuff on the right shoulder. The insurance company will go back and say, hey, Sean, we talked to you early on and you've never mentioned that, shoulder pain. It was just back and neck. So I think maybe you could say, Sean, it's good service, but I think there's always underlining, motive for that communication too, in order to better position themselves in the future in case that's needed.
Yeah. What about, sort of, I don't want to say the flip side of good service, but, sometimes there's delays during the claims process, right? Is that a strategy that an insurance company will use, or is it just the nature of those kinds of cases?
I think, to be honest with you, Sean, I think from my experience, it's really a deny and delay tactic here. And the reason for that is sometimes, and unfortunately, the situation is after a motor vehicle collision, sometimes the individual isn't able to work. And if you're not able to work, you can't financially support yourself, you can't support your family. And the problem with that is that's when people start to get desperate. So if you wave some money in front of their eyes and say, hey, we'll pay this on this claim, even though it's very, the amount is little compared to what your injuries are, some people will take it. I've seen recently, I seen an individual who, the insurance company, like you said, called within about 2 or 3 days from the auto collision. And the first thing that they offered was, I believe it was $3,000 or $4,000 on the claim. And when the person obviously needed the money, they accepted it. They continued with their treatment. They realized that they needed surgery in the future. And, there's nothing I could do. Once you sign that contract early on, it's done. And there's very little that you could do to overcome it. So,
Yeah. In other words, you're signing. They're giving me a check for $4,000, and I'm signing saying or cashing the check implies that I release them of any future claims. Basically, right? It's not like $4,000 now and
of course, it's usually just a release you sign that says, in exchange for $4,000, you promise never to sue us again for this auto collision.
right.
And, it's unfortunate, but I understand sometimes people do need money, but I think
Sure.
that it's always right to at least consult with an attorney first and get that second opinion before, you jump the gun on whatever is being offered to you right after a collision.
Well, speak to that, Christian. Like, how does having, a lawyer change the way, say, an insurance company is going to approach, if I were seriously injured and they knew I was represented by someone like you, can I expect different treatment, so to speak?
I think the insurance companies know that the lawyers know the tactics that they tend to use, to diminish claims that people have. And
Hmm.
I think that that's the first thing. Obviously, you want somebody who has experience with the actual, Michigan no fault statute, the other statutes that come into play, and then obviously the case law that comes from the Court of Appeal or the Michigan Supreme Court. And that's a very good benefit. And I think the second thing is when you hire an attorney, you are telling the insurance company, this is serious enough where I felt like I needed an attorney to represent me. And I think that kind of changed the mindset of the insurance side. And they say, this person is taking this way more seriously than, a normal person would after a collision. And, maybe that rethinks how they value a case.
Mhm, mhm. What about, I mean, given the amount of time and energy you've spent in this space, is there a scenario that you could walk us through where, the insurance company initially undervalued a claim, as that's no surprise there, but the case developed, into a very different situation, much to everybody's surprise?
Yeah, I can't think of one example specifically, but I could tell you one I guess, that I remember, partially is that, I had a claim where it's the same thing. I got the phone call from the adjuster. The adjuster says, "We'll give you 5,000. These are, soft tissue injuries, and that's it. You're not gonna get any more from us. If you wanna file the lawsuit, we will fight this case, to the end."
Yeah,
Obviously, I filed the lawsuit for the, client. The client continues with the treatment, and, through the treatment process, they end up getting an MRI, and the MRI doesn't show, these soft injuries that they're claiming, but disc bulges in, the lower back.
yeah,
And, and following that, obviously the treatment, went from physical therapy to, something a little more extensive like injections, to help relieve the pain. And that changed the case from, I believe it was maybe a 5,000 initial offer to somewhere between 50 to 100,000 on the value of the case. And, that almost 10 times the value that was initially offered. And I think that's, one of the important things about having an attorney. Um, you don't want to jump the gun on anything. You want a thorough, review of your medical records. And then also the hard thing is sometimes, and I know it's hard to tell, my clients, it's sometimes a waiting game a little bit. You have to let your treatment progress in order to know what your injuries are. I can't have you come, within the first week of seeing me, and I could tell you, looking in your eyes, and say, your pace is worth 100,000. And it's very hard to do that until I see, where the treatment is and what your actual medical records indicate.
that makes sense. Um with the few minutes we have left, Christian, what, in your opinion or experience, really, what usually makes the difference between, a claim that remains undervalued versus one that, reaches a more substantial outcome, perhaps, more in line with what it, warrants?
Yeah, and I think it's something that we just recently talked about, and it's just, getting that medical treatment that's needed. You need somebody who could thoroughly, review your medical records, obviously have you follow up on appointments that you need to do with their treatment. And then obviously just having that experienced legal representation. I think that makes a huge difference. Without that, you know, your attorneys, without that expertise, attorneys will sell cases for whatever, undervalued. But if you get the proper representation and your attorney, like at Ravid and Associates, takes their time with this case and obviously makes sure everything is covered through litigation, you will have the maximum, benefit that, you're owed based off of your injuries.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I hear too. I mean, it's tough, right? Because in a scenario you mentioned earlier, someone's in desperate need of some cash now, right? Whereas I feel what I hear in a lot of what you're saying too is not the longer you wait, the better, but you're going through the process of therapy and being checked out, and time is kind of your friend in that process, it seems like. Don't be in such a hurry to have it all go away because there's things you don't know.
That's fair, Sean. Exactly what you said. Sometimes it does take time, and I understand that there's X factors out there too, but I think you have to sometimes let the process, develop or play out a little bit longer than what your expectation is if you plan on, receiving the maximum benefits that you're owed because of a motor vehicle collision.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you, uh, Christian. We're up against time, but as always, appreciate your expertise on this, and I look forward to connecting on a future episode.
Perfect. I always get to see you, Sean.
That's it for today's episode of Detroit Auto Accident Law with Ravid and Associates. To learn more or schedule your free consultation, visit their website, ravidandassociates.com. You pay no legal fees unless they recover for you. Thanks for listening, and it always helps if you leave us a thumbs up, subscribe to the podcast, or maybe share a link with someone in your world who would benefit from this kind of information. I'm Sean O'Connor. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.